In a world where appearances often deceive, some of the most powerful warriors walk among us unnoticed. They blend into crowds, serve coffee at local diners, or work quietly in office buildings. But when danger strikes, their true nature emerges like lightning splitting the darkness. What you're about to discover is a story that will shatter every assumption you have about strength, courage, and the unexpected heroes who protect us when we least expect it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street in Kandahar, Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her civilian clothing one final time before stepping out of the armored vehicle. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another aid worker delivering supplies to the local school. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothing was deliberately unremarkable. The only hint of her true identity was the subtle way her eyes continuously scanned the environment, cataloging every doorway, rooftop, and potential threat. Maria had been operating under deep cover for 3 months now. As one of the Navy's most elite SEALs, she had completed missions that would make seasoned soldiers question their own courage. But this assignment was different. She wasn't here to eliminate a high-value target or gather intelligence on enemy movements. Instead, she was protecting something far more precious, a group of 4 young soldiers who had volunteered for a humanitarian mission that had unknowingly put them in the crosshairs of a dangerous insurgent cell. The 4 soldiers, Corporal Jake Thompson, Specialist Sarah Chen, Private First Class Marcus Williams, and Corporal David Kumar, had arrived in Afghanistan just 6 weeks earlier. They were part of a new initiative to rebuild schools and provide educational supplies to children in war-torn regions. Their enthusiasm was admirable, but their inexperience in combat situations made them vulnerable. Military intelligence had intercepted communications, suggesting that a local insurgent group was planning to kidnap American soldiers to use as bargaining chips in upcoming negotiations. Maria's mission was simple in concept, but complex in execution. She needed to stay close enough to the 4 soldiers to protect them without revealing her identity or compromising their humanitarian work. The brass had decided that if the soldiers knew they were being protected by a Navy SEAL, they might become overconfident or alter their behavior in ways that could attract unwanted attention. As she walked toward the school building where the 4 soldiers were setting up a temporary library, Maria reflected on how she had ended up in this unique position. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she had learned early that survival often depended on not looking like a threat while being ready for anything. Her father, a Marine veteran, had taught her that the best warriors were those who could blend in until the moment action was required. Path to becoming a Navy SEAL had been grueling. When she first applied, many questioned whether a woman could handle the physical and mental demands of the training. The basic underwater demolition SEAL training, known as BUD-S, had pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. During Hell Week, when candidates are subjected to 5.5 days of cold, wet, brutally difficult operational training on fewer than 4 hours of sleep, she had watched men twice her size ring the bell and quit. But Maria had something that couldn't be measured in muscle mass or height. She had an unbreakable will and the ability to think clearly under pressure. After completing BUD-S, she had gone on to complete advanced SEAL training, learning everything from close-quarters combat to underwater demolition. She became proficient in multiple languages, advanced medical training, and psychological operations. But perhaps her most valuable skill was her ability to appear harmless while being anything but. The school where the soldiers were working was a modest building that had been damaged by mortar fire the previous year. Local contractors, funded by the humanitarian mission, had repaired the structure, and now the 4 American soldiers were helping to stock it with books, computers, and educational materials. The children in the area had shown tremendous enthusiasm for the project, often gathering around the soldiers as they worked. Corporal Jake Thompson was the unofficial leader of the group. At 24, he was the oldest and had some experience in conflict zones, though nothing like what Afghanistan presented. He had volunteered for the mission because he believed in the power of education to change lives. His own childhood in rural Nebraska had been transformed when a teacher had encouraged him to pursue his interest in engineering. Specialist Sarah Chen brought a different perspective to the team. The daughter of Chinese immigrants, she had grown up understanding the value of education in creating opportunities. She spoke 3 languages fluently and had been instrumental in communicating with local families about the school project. Her technical skills were also invaluable, as she was responsible for setting up the computer lab that would give local children access to modern educational tools. Private First Class Marcus Williams was the youngest member of the team at just 19 years old. He had joined the military straight out of high school, partly to escape a difficult family situation, and partly because he wanted to make a difference in the world. His enthusiasm sometimes outweighed his caution, which made Maria particularly concerned about his safety. Corporal David Kumar completed the group. Born in India but raised in Texas, he understood the complex cultural dynamics that the team needed to navigate in Afghanistan. His calm demeanor and diplomatic skills had helped the team build trust with local community leaders, which was essential for the success of their mission. As Maria approached the school, she noticed that the usual crowd of curious children was smaller than normal. This was the first sign that something might be wrong. Local children had become accustomed to the American soldiers and typically gathered to watch them work and practice their English. The absence of their usual enthusiasm set off alarm bells in Maria's mind. She decided to position herself at a small T stand across the street from the school, a location that would give her a clear view of the building while allowing her to blend in with the local civilians who frequently gathered there. The elderly man who ran the stand, Hassan, had become accustomed to her presence over the past few weeks and greeted her with a friendly nod. Through the open windows of the school, Maria could see the 4 soldiers working diligently. Jake and David were assembling bookshelves in what would become the library, while Sarah worked on connecting computers in the adjacent classroom. Marcus was outside, organizing supplies that had been delivered earlier that morning. It was then that Maria noticed the first concrete sign of trouble. 3 men in traditional Afghan clothing had positioned themselves at various points around the school. To most observers, they would appear to be locals going about their daily business. But Maria's trained eye caught the subtle signs that marked them as potential threats. Their positioning was too strategic to be coincidental, and despite their casual appearance, they were clearly coordinating their movements. One man was positioned near the main entrance to the school, pretending to examine goods at a nearby fruit stand. Another had stationed himself at the corner of the building, ostensibly reading a newspaper. The third was across the street, closer to Maria's position, speaking quietly on a mobile phone while keeping his eyes on the school. Maria's training kicked in immediately. She began cataloging escape routes, potential weapons, and the exact positions of innocent civilians who might be caught in crossfire if the situation escalated. She also started calculating how quickly she could reach the 4 soldiers if they came under attack. The men's behavior became increasingly suspicious as the morning progressed. They were clearly conducting surveillance, and Maria realized they were likely waiting for the right moment to make their move. The question was whether they planned to attack immediately or wait for a better opportunity. Around noon, the pattern of the men's movements changed. The one near the fruit stand began walking slowly toward the school's main entrance. The man with the newspaper folded it up and started moving toward the side of the building. The third man ended his phone call and began crossing the street. Maria realized that the attack was about to begin. She had perhaps 2 minutes before the men would be in position to strike. The 4 soldiers inside the school were completely unaware of the danger approaching them. They were focused on their work, discussing the best way to arrange the library to maximize space for the children who would use it. Without hesitation, Maria stood up from the tea stand and began moving toward the school. She needed to position herself where she could respond most effectively while maintaining her cover for as long as possible. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to appear casual while bringing her closer to her objective. As she walked, Maria's mind raced through the tactical considerations. She was outnumbered 3 to 1, possibly more if additional attackers were waiting nearby. She was armed, but her weapons were concealed and would take precious seconds to draw. Most importantly, she needed to protect 4 soldiers who had no idea they were about to come under attack. The man near the fruit stand was now just 20 feet from the school's entrance. Maria could see the outline of what appeared to be a weapon beneath his loose-fitting shirt. The other 2 men were moving into flanking positions, and it was clear that they intended to surround the building. Maria quickened her pace slightly, still maintaining the appearance of a casual pedestrian. She was now close enough to see Marcus clearly as he continued organizing supplies outside the school, completely oblivious to the danger approaching from multiple directions. The first attacker reached the edge of the school property and began moving toward the entrance where Marcus was working. It was at this moment that Maria realized the attack was seconds away from beginning. The time for maintaining her cover was over. The time for action had arrived. As the lead attacker took his final steps toward Marcus, who was bent over a box of textbooks, Maria made her decision. She dropped all pretense of being a civilian aid worker and became what she had trained her entire adult life to be, a warrior ready to protect those who could not protect themselves. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The unassuming woman in civilian clothes became a highly trained special operations soldier, her body language shifting to that of someone prepared for combat. She began closing the distance to the attackers, her movements now purposeful and precise. What happened next would forever change how the four soldiers viewed courage, strength, and the unexpected heroes who sometimes emerge in moments of crisis. In 45 seconds, everything they thought they knew about the aid worker who had been quietly working near their school for the past several weeks would be shattered and replaced with something far more extraordinary. The first attacker was now within 10 feet of Marcus when Maria made her move. She had covered the distance from the T-stand with remarkable speed, her approach angle calculated to intercept the threat before he could reach the unsuspecting soldier. The attacker's hand was moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his shirt when Maria struck. Her first action was to grab a handful of sand from the ground and fling it directly into the lead attacker's eyes. The momentary blindness gave her the split second she needed to close the final distance and deliver a devastating blow to his solar plexus. The man doubled over, gasping for air, his weapon clattering to the ground before he could draw it. Marcus looked up from the box of textbooks he had been organizing, confusion written across his face as he tried to process what he was seeing. The woman he had occasionally noticed around the school was now engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a man he had never seen before. "Get inside, now!" Maria shouted to Marcus as she spun to face the second attacker, who was approaching from the side of the building. Her voice carried an authority that Marcus had never heard from her before, and something in her tone made him obey without question. The second attacker had drawn a knife and was advancing quickly, thinking he could overwhelm the unexpected defender before she could fully react to his presence. He was wrong. Maria had been tracking his movement from the corner of her eye even while dealing with the first threat. As he lunged forward with the blade, she sidestepped with fluid grace and grabbed his wrist, using his own momentum to throw him over her hip in a perfect judo throw that sent him crashing into the wall of the school building. Inside the school, the other three soldiers had heard Marcus's urgent entry and Maria's shouted warning. Jake Thompson immediately understood that something serious was happening and began moving toward the windows to assess the situation. What he saw outside defied every assumption he had made about the quiet aid worker who had been working in the area. Sarah Chen was the first to recognize the tactical nature of what they were witnessing. Her technical background had included some military strategy training, and she could see that the woman outside was demonstrating combat skills far beyond what any civilian aid worker should possess. "Who is she?" David Kumar asked, his voice barely above a whisper as they watched the confrontation unfold outside. The third attacker had circled around to approach from the back of the building, intending to enter through a rear window and catch the soldiers from behind. But Maria's tactical awareness extended far beyond the immediate threats she was engaging. She had been tracking all three attackers from the moment she first noticed them, and she knew exactly where the third man would try to strike. As the second attacker struggled to regain his footing after being thrown against the wall, Maria was already moving toward the rear of the building. She arrived at the back corner just as the third attacker was attempting to climb through a window. Her approach was silent, and he never saw her coming. Maria grabbed the man's ankle just as he was halfway through the window and yanked him backward with tremendous force. He fell hard to the ground outside, and before he could recover, she had secured his weapon and rendered him unconscious with a precise strike to a pressure point on his neck. The entire engagement had lasted exactly 45 seconds, during which Maria had neutralized 3 armed attackers without suffering a single injury herself. But more importantly, she had protected 4 soldiers who would have been completely helpless against a coordinated assault. As the immediate threat was eliminated, Maria quickly surveyed the area to ensure no additional attackers were approaching. She then began securing the weapons that the 3 men had been carrying, her movements efficient and professional. Only when she was certain that the immediate danger had passed did she turn her attention to the four soldiers who were now staring at her from inside the school building. Jake Thompson was the first to emerge from the building, his military training overriding his confusion about what had just occurred. "Are you injured?" he asked, approaching Maria with caution. "I'm fine," Maria replied, her voice now carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to post-combat situations. "But we need to secure this area and call for backup immediately." Sarah Chen had her radio ready and was already contacting their base to report the incident. As she spoke to their commanding officers, she kept glancing at Maria, trying to reconcile the woman who had just single-handedly defeated 3 attackers with the quiet aid worker she thought she had known. Marcus emerged from the building, still shaken by how quickly the situation had developed and been resolved. "I don't understand," he said. "Who are you? How did you know they were going to attack us?" Maria looked at the 4 soldiers, realizing that her cover was now completely blown. The mission parameters had changed dramatically, and she would need to reveal at least part of her true identity to maintain their trust and continue protecting them. "My name is Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez," she said, her voice taking on the formal tone she used when addressing other military personnel. "I'm with the United States Navy, and I've been assigned to provide security for your mission." David Kumar's eyes widened as he processed this information. "You're military, but we were told that our security would be provided by local contractors and regular patrols." "That was the cover story," Maria explained. "Intelligence indicated that your mission had been compromised and that there was a specific threat against American soldiers working on humanitarian projects. I was assigned to provide close protection without compromising the appearance of your civilian operation." Jake Thompson, as the senior soldier in the group, stepped forward with questions that needed immediate answers. "What's your rank and unit? Who authorized this protection detail?" Maria hesitated for a moment, knowing that revealing her true specialty would raise even more questions. But the situation had evolved beyond the point where partial truths would suffice. "I'm a Navy SEAL assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group," she said quietly. "My orders came directly from CENTCOM, and your commanding officers are aware of my presence, though they were instructed not to inform you for operational security reasons." The silence that followed this revelation was profound. All 4 soldiers stared at Maria with a mixture of awe, confusion, and respect. They had been working alongside one of the military's most elite warriors for weeks, without having any idea of her true identity. Sarah Chen was the first to speak. "A Navy SEAL, but I didn't know women could be SEALs." "The program opened to women several years ago," Maria explained, "though the number of female SEALs remains very small due to the extreme physical and mental demands of the training." Marcus was still processing the speed and efficiency with which Maria had handled the attack. "You took down 3 armed men in less than a minute," he said, his voice filled with incredulous respect. 45 seconds, Maria corrected automatically, and they weren't particularly well trained. A competent insurgent cell would have posted additional spotters and had backup plans. As they spoke, the sound of approaching vehicles indicated that the backup Sarah had called for was arriving. Maria quickly briefed the 4 soldiers on what they should expect during the debriefing process and how the incident might affect their mission. "Will we be able to continue the school project?" David asked, clearly concerned that the attack might end their humanitarian work. "That will depend on the threat assessment going forward," Maria replied. "But I can tell you that the 3 men who attacked today were likely acting on outdated intelligence. Our response will send a message to other potential threats that American soldiers in this area are not as vulnerable as they might have thought." The first vehicle to arrive contained a squad of military police who immediately began securing the scene and taking the 3 attackers into custody. The unconscious men were beginning to regain consciousness, and they would soon be transported to a detention facility for interrogation. Captain Lisa Morrison, the commanding officer for the humanitarian mission, arrived in the second vehicle. She approached Maria with a mixture of relief and concern. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I need a full debrief on what happened here," she said, "and I need to know if you believe the threat level has changed for the remainder of the mission." Maria provided a concise tactical summary of the attack and her response. She explained how she had identified the threats before they could act, and how she had neutralized them without any casualties among the soldiers she was protecting. The attack pattern suggests this was a planned kidnapping attempt rather than a broader insurgent operation, she concluded. With these three in custody, the immediate threat has been eliminated, but we should expect increased scrutiny of our operations going forward. Captain Morrison turned to address the four soldiers who had been the targets of the attack. I want you all to understand that what happened here today, and the revelation of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's true identity, is classified information. You will not discuss these details with anyone outside of official military channels. Jake Thompson nodded his understanding. Will Staff Sergeant Rodriguez continue to provide security for our mission? That decision will be made at a higher level, Captain Morrison replied. But given that her cover has been compromised, changes to the security arrangement are likely. As the initial excitement of the incident began to fade, the four soldiers found themselves looking at Maria with new eyes. The unassuming aid worker they had barely noticed was revealed to be one of the most highly trained warriors in the American military. Sarah Chen approached Maria as the debriefing continued around them. How long have you been watching us? Since before you arrived in country, Maria replied. I was briefed on your mission and your backgrounds before you even left the States. Did you know this attack was going to happen today? I knew there was a threat, but the timing and exact method were unknown. That's why constant vigilance was necessary. Marcus joined their conversation, still amazed by what he had witnessed. Have you ever had to do anything like this before? Protect other soldiers while under cover? Maria considered her answer carefully. Much of her operational history was classified, but she could share some general information. This type of close protection mission is relatively new for SEAL teams, she said. Traditionally, we focus on direct action missions, reconnaissance, and counterterrorism operations. But as the nature of conflicts has evolved, so have our roles. David Kumar had been listening to their conversation while also observing the military police as they processed the scene. What happens to us now? Do we continue the school project? That decision isn't mine to make, Maria replied. But I can tell you that the work you're doing here is important. Education and humanitarian aid are powerful tools for building stability in regions like this. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that the incident would have significant implications for the mission going forward. The three attackers were identified as members of a local criminal organization that had been hired by a larger insurgent group to kidnap American soldiers. Their capture provided valuable intelligence about the broader threat network in the region. For Maria, the compromise of her cover meant that her role in the mission would need to change dramatically. She could no longer operate as an unnoticed civilian, but her presence had proved invaluable in protecting the soldiers under her care. The four soldiers who had been the targets of the attack found themselves processing not only the trauma of having been attacked, but also the revelation that they had been under the protection of one of America's most elite warriors. It was a humbling experience that would forever change their understanding of courage, sacrifice, and the hidden guardians who watch over those who serve their country. As the sun began to set over Kandahar, the immediate crisis had passed, but the larger questions about the future of their mission and Maria's role in it remained to be answered. The 45 seconds that had changed everything were just the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold in ways none of them could yet imagine. 3 days after the attack, the four soldiers found themselves sitting in a secure briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman, facing a decision that would determine not only the future of their humanitarian mission, but also their own military careers. The room was stark and functional, with concrete walls and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows across the faces of everyone present. Captain Morrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by Colonel James Patterson, the regional commander, and Major Elizabeth Hayes, the intelligence officer who had originally identified the threat against the humanitarian mission. Maria sat across from the four soldiers, now wearing her full military uniform with her Navy SEAL trident prominently displayed. The intelligence gathered from the three attackers has provided us with significant insights into the threat network operating in this region, Colonel Patterson began. What we've learned has implications that extend far beyond your specific mission. Major Hayes opened a classified folder and spread several photographs across the table. The men who attacked you were part of a larger organization that has been targeting Western aid workers and military personnel throughout the province. Their plan was to kidnap American soldiers and use them as leverage in ongoing negotiations. Sarah Chen studied the photographs, recognizing one of the faces as belonging to a man she had seen several times in the local market. "We were being watched for much longer than we realized," she said quietly. "That's correct," Major Hayes confirmed. "Our interrogation of the three attackers revealed that they had been conducting surveillance on your team for nearly a month before the attempted kidnapping." Jake Thompson looked directly at Maria. "How long did you know about this surveillance?" "I identified potential watchers within the first week of your mission," Maria replied. "But surveillance alone isn't enough to take action. We needed them to make a move so we could identify the full extent of their network." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Are you saying we were used as bait?" Colonel Patterson intervened before Maria could respond. "Private Williams, no one in this room considers any of you expendable. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was positioned to ensure your safety while we gathered the intelligence necessary to dismantle this threat network." David Kumar had been quiet throughout the briefing, but now he spoke up with a question that had been troubling him since the attack. "If Maria, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, hadn't been there, what would have happened to us?" The silence that followed his question was answer enough. None of the officers in the room needed to spell out the likely outcome of a successful kidnapping by armed insurgents. Captain Morrison leaned forward, her expression serious. "Which brings us to the decision you need to make. The attack has fundamentally changed the security situation for your mission. We can no longer maintain the fiction that you're operating as unprotected civilian contractors." "What are our options?" Jake asked, speaking for the group. Major Hayes consulted her notes before responding. "Option 1 is immediate extraction. You would be reassigned to duties within the secure perimeter of this base or rotated back to the States. Your humanitarian mission would be considered complete." The disappointment on the faces of all 4 soldiers was immediately apparent. They had invested weeks of effort in the school project and had developed relationships with local children and families who were counting on their continued presence. "What's option 2?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected it might not be much better. "Option 2 is continuation of the mission with a completely different security profile," Colonel Patterson explained. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez would remain as your overt protection detail, but this would fundamentally change the nature of your work in the community." Maria spoke for the first time since the briefing had begun. "If I remain with you as an acknowledged military presence, it will change how the local population perceives your mission. Some will see it as evidence that the Americans don't trust them. Others might view it as a sign of weakness that you need protection to do your work." "But there is a third option," Captain Morrison said, surprising everyone in the room. "It's unconventional, and it would require approval from significantly higher up the chain of command." The 4 soldiers exchanged glances, each hoping that this third option might allow them to continue their work while maintaining their safety. "We continue the mission with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez transitioning to an advisory role," Captain Morrison explained. "She would train all of you in basic personal security and threat awareness, essentially teaching you to protect yourselves while she provides overwatch from a distance." Marcus looked skeptical. "You mean turn us into some kind of junior special operations soldiers?" "Not exactly," Maria interjected. "What Captain Morrison is suggesting is that we teach you enough tactical awareness and basic defensive skills to make you significantly harder targets while allowing you to maintain your humanitarian mission." David was intrigued by the possibility. "How much training are we talking about?" 2 weeks of intensive instruction," Major Hayes replied. "Combat awareness, basic hand-to-hand defense, weapons familiarization, emergency medical training, and communications protocols." "And then what?" Sarah asked. "We go back to the school as if nothing happened." "You go back as better prepared soldiers who happen to be working on a humanitarian mission," Colonel Patterson corrected. "The local population doesn't need to know about your additional training, but you'll be equipped to handle threats that might arise." Jake Thompson considered the implications carefully. As the senior member of the group, he knew that his decision would heavily influence what the others chose to do. "What does Staff Sergeant Rodriguez think about this plan?" he asked. All eyes turned to Maria, who had been listening to the discussion while mentally evaluating the tactical challenges of each option. "Honestly, it's risky," she said. "2 weeks of training cannot replace years of experience, but it's better than sending you back out there with no additional preparation, and it allows the mission to continue." "Would you be comfortable with our safety if we went through this training?" David asked. Maria met his gaze directly. "I would be comfortable with your ability to recognize and respond to immediate threats. I would still maintain overwatch, but from concealed positions rather than as an overt presence." The room fell silent as the 4 soldiers contemplated their options. Each was weighing their desire to complete the humanitarian mission against the very real dangers they now knew they faced. Sarah Chen was the first to speak. "I want to continue the mission. Those children at the school are counting on us, and I'm not comfortable with the idea of abandoning them because of the actions of a few criminals." Marcus nodded his agreement. "I joined the military to make a difference. Running away because things got dangerous doesn't feel like making a difference." David looked thoughtful. "If we do this training and go back, what happens if we encounter another threat? Are we expected to handle it ourselves, or would Staff Sergeant Rodriguez intervene?" "The training would give you the skills to handle immediate threats and buy time for backup to arrive," Maria explained. "I would still be positioned to provide support, but the goal would be for you to be capable of protecting yourselves in most situations." Jake Thompson made his decision. "I think we should do the training and continue the mission, but I want assurance that if the threat level increases beyond what we're trained to handle, we'll be extracted immediately." Colonel Patterson nodded his approval. "That's acceptable. Major Hayes will monitor the intelligence situation continuously, and any indication of escalating threats will result in immediate extraction." Captain Morrison looked at each soldier individually. "I need verbal confirmation from each of you that you understand the risks and are volunteering for this extended mission." One by one, each soldier confirmed their commitment to continuing the humanitarian mission despite the increased dangers. "All right then," Colonel Patterson said, standing to indicate that the briefing was concluding. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you'll design and implement a 2-week training program tailored specifically to the threat environment these soldiers will face. Major Hayes will provide updated intelligence briefings daily. Captain Morrison will coordinate logistics." As the meeting broke up, Maria found herself alone with the 4 soldiers she had protected and would now train. "What should we expect from this training?" Jake asked. "It's going to be challenging," Maria replied honestly. "I'll be condensing skills that normally take months to develop into 2 weeks, but I believe you're all capable of learning what you need to know." Sarah looked concerned. "Will the local people at the school be suspicious if we're gone for 2 weeks?" "We'll tell them you're attending a training conference on educational techniques," Maria said. "It's close enough to the truth that it should satisfy most questions." Over the following 2 weeks, the 4 soldiers underwent the most intensive training of their military careers. Maria pushed them through scenarios they never could have imagined when they first volunteered for humanitarian duty. They learned to read the subtle signs that indicated surveillance, to identify potential threats before they became immediate dangers, and to position themselves tactically even while appearing to go about normal humanitarian work. They practiced hand-to-hand combat techniques designed to create opportunities for escape rather than to win fights. They learned to use common objects as improvised weapons and to provide emergency medical care under stress. Perhaps most importantly, they learned to work together as a team with enhanced situational awareness, each member responsible for monitoring different areas and potential threats while maintaining their cover as aid workers. The training was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Maria's standards were uncompromising, and she pushed each soldier beyond their perceived limitations. "Remember," she told them repeatedly, "the goal is not to become special operations soldiers. The goal is to stay alive long enough for help to arrive and to complete your mission successfully." By the end of the 2 weeks, the transformation in all 4 soldiers was remarkable. They moved with greater confidence and awareness, their eyes constantly scanning their environment while maintaining natural conversations. They had developed the ability to communicate with subtle hand signals and to coordinate their movements without obvious discussion. When they returned to the school, the local children and families welcomed them enthusiastically. The cover story about attending educational training had been accepted without question, and the mission resumed with renewed energy. But now the four soldiers were different. They noticed things they had missed before: the way certain individuals watched them, the patterns of vehicle traffic around the school, the subtle changes in local behavior that might indicate emerging threats. Maria maintained her overwatch from concealed positions, but she noticed that the soldiers were requiring less protection because they were better at avoiding dangerous situations altogether. 3 months later, as their deployment neared its end, the school project had been completed successfully. The library was fully stocked and operational, the computer lab was training local teachers, and a sustainable education program had been established with community support. On their final day at the school, the four soldiers gathered with Maria to reflect on their experience. "When we started this mission, I thought the biggest challenge would be language barriers and cultural differences," David said. "I never imagined we'd end up training with a Navy SEAL and fighting off kidnappers." Sarah laughed. "I still can't believe we spent weeks working alongside one of the military's most elite warriors without knowing it." Marcus looked at Maria with obvious respect. "What you taught us changed everything, not just about staying safe, but about being aware of our environment and working together as a team." Jake Thompson, ever practical, had a final question. "Will other humanitarian missions have this kind of protection? What we learned here could be valuable for other soldiers doing similar work." "That's above my pay grade," Maria replied. "But I think the success of this mission will influence how future humanitarian deployments are planned and protected." As they prepared to leave Afghanistan, the four soldiers carried with them not only the satisfaction of having completed their mission, but also skills and awareness that would serve them throughout their military careers and beyond. The school they left behind was more than just a building filled with books and computers. It was a symbol of what could be accomplished when courage, dedication, and the willingness to face danger for a greater cause came together. For Maria, the mission had been unique in her special operations career. Instead of eliminating threats, she had protected those who were building something positive in a dangerous world. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important victories were measured not in enemies defeated, but in futures made possible. The 45 seconds that had revealed her true identity had been just the beginning of a story that demonstrated how hidden strength, properly applied, could protect not only lives but also hope itself.